Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we unravel the chilling stories that hide beneath the surface of ordinary lives. In today's episode, we delve into the shocking tale of a mother and her daughter's boyfriend, a betrayal that shattered trust and changed lives forever. Emma Roberts lived a quiet life in the small town of Willow Creek, a place where everyone knew each other and nothing stayed hidden for long. At 19, Emma was well known and well liked by her neighbors. She was kind, grounded, and responsible, often helping her mom around the house and volunteering at the local animal shelter. She lived with her mother, Sarah Roberts, a woman in her late 40s who had been Emma's rock for as long as she could remember. Since her husband's unexpected passing when Emma was young, Sarah had been raising Emma on her own. Together, they formed a tight-knit, inseparable duo who leaned on each other for support and companionship. Sarah was a dedicated mother, and she'd devoted her life to making sure Emma had a loving home and stable life. She filled her days with work at a nearby boutique and made time for weekend outings with Emma, ranging from farmers markets to movie marathons at home. Emma admired her mother's strength, and though they had occasional disagreements, Emma never doubted Sarah's love and loyalty. When Emma started dating Jake, her mom was supportive and excited for her. Jake was a charming young man with an easygoing personality that made him instantly likable. He was a few years older than Emma, working at a nearby auto repair shop. With his boyish smile and warm personality, Jake fit easily into Emma's life, quickly earning the approval of Emma's family and friends. Jake even seemed close to Sarah, who was often delighted to see Emma happy with someone so considerate and respectful. In the beginning, Jake spent time with Emma and Sarah as a family, often joining them for dinner and game nights. Sarah enjoyed his company, and Jake was generous with his time, offering to help out around the house whenever he visited. Sarah saw him as a positive influence on Emma, someone who could make her daughter feel safe, secure, and loved. Jake was almost like a member of the family, and Sarah openly expressed her happiness that Emma had found such a kind-hearted boyfriend. As time went on, however, Emma began to notice subtle changes in her mother. Sarah, who had always been content with a laid-back wardrobe, started dressing more stylishly and paying closer attention to her appearance. At first, Emma thought nothing of it, brushing it off as her mom wanting to feel good about herself. Sarah also began spending more time in the gym, taking up yoga, and trying new hairstyles. Neighbors would often comment on how much happier Sarah seemed, and Emma was pleased her mom was finally taking care of herself. But Emma couldn't shake a strange feeling whenever she noticed her mother and Jake in conversation. Sarah seemed unusually focused on Jake, even laughing at his jokes with a brightness that felt out of place. Emma told herself it was just her imagination, that her mother was just glad to have more people around after so many years of loneliness. Emma tried to ignore the unsettling feeling growing in her chest, reminding herself that her mother and boyfriend were only getting along well, nothing more. After all, wasn't it a good thing that her family had become so close? She repeated this to herself often, trying to convince herself, yet there were moments when Sarah's behavior bordered on excessive. Her mom, always cheerful but reserved, had become uncharacteristically bubbly and enthusiastic whenever Jake was around. She'd laugh heartily at his jokes, lean in closely during conversations, and offer her help on small tasks he could easily do himself. Soon, Emma noticed that Jake was stopping by the house more often than usual, sometimes even when she wasn't home. She'd come back from errands to find Jake and her mother chatting in the living room or preparing dinner together, laughing as though they shared a private joke. Once, Emma returned to see them rearranging some shelves together. They seemed at ease in each other's company, and Jake barely seemed surprised to see Emma come through the door, almost as if he'd forgotten she lived there too. When she asked why Jake was there without her, he'd brush it off with a laugh, claiming he'd come to surprise her, and caught up with Sarah instead. Emma started feeling a faint unease, though she tried not to let it show. The changes in her mother's appearance became even more noticeable. Sarah began wearing more makeup, dressing in trendy clothes, and even experimenting with accessories Emma had never seen her interested in before. It was as if she was trying to reclaim her youth, but Emma found it odd that this transformation coincided so perfectly with Jake's growing presence in their lives. Friends and neighbors noticed the shift, often remarking on how radiant Sarah seemed lately. Some even teased Emma about how her mother was outshining her, but Emma laughed it off, not wanting to show her discomfort. The strain on Emma's relationship with Jake was mounting too. He became distant, often distracted when they were together, frequently checking his phone or seeming eager to leave early. When she asked if something was wrong, he'd brush it off, reassuring her with a kiss or a smile. But Emma knew something was changing. Their once close and easy relationship felt strained and uncomfortable, leaving her questioning everything. One evening, while having dinner with Sarah and Jake, Emma's discomfort reached a peak. Sarah seemed unusually animated, laughing loudly, her eyes lingering on Jake as she asked about his work, his hobbies, his future plans. Emma could feel herself shrinking, almost as if she were a spectator in her own relationship. She felt almost invisible, and the warmth that used to characterize these family dinners felt hollow and tense. She brushed it off once more, assuring herself that there was nothing going on, that she was simply overthinking everything. But as the days passed, Emma couldn't help but feel more and more like an outsider in her own home, quietly witnessing the unsettling dynamic between the two people she trusted most. The small red flags kept adding up, and Emma wondered if the relationship she thought was so secure was slowly slipping away from her grasp. As the months went by, Emma's nagging sense of unease became impossible to ignore. Despite her efforts to remain calm and dismiss her suspicions, a series of red flags began to accumulate, each more troubling than the last. It wasn't just her mother's changing behavior anymore now, it was Jake's actions, too, that left her questioning the sincerity of everyone around her. She noticed that Jake had become inconsistent, showing up to dates late or canceling plans last minute. He'd claim he was busy with work or tired, yet Emma could sense there was something more to it. His affection seemed forced, his focus drifting during conversations. She tried to bring it up with him once or twice, but he brushed off her concerns, assuring her it was all in her head. One afternoon, Emma discovered something that left her questioning her entire relationship. She'd borrowed Jake's car while hers was being serviced, and as she went to grab her purse from the back seat, she found an old receipt tucked between the seats. It was dated from a few weeks earlier and showed a sizable purchase from a high-end jewelry store and an extravagant gift she hadn't received. Her stomach twisted as she stared at the receipt, a whirlwind of emotions flooding her mind. She felt confusion, hurt, and a creeping sense of betrayal that she couldn't ignore. She wondered if Jake had bought the gift for someone else, but when she confronted him, he claimed it was a present for his mother's birthday, which had passed not long before. He offered a brief smile, looking almost relieved to have an excuse. Emma tried to believe him, but a seed of doubt had already been planted, and her trust in Jake began to erode. As days passed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The once comfortable bond she shared with Jake felt strained, distant, and painfully awkward. Jake became more elusive, his excuses for canceled plans increasingly vague, and he seemed to find reasons to leave her house early. Meanwhile, Sarah's behavior continued to raise suspicions. She was even more attentive to her appearance, now sporting designer clothes and perfume Emma had never seen before. When Emma casually mentioned the perfume one day, Sarah's response seemed rehearsed and quick, a simple, "Oh, it was a gift from an old friend." Yet there was an unfamiliar, almost secretive quality in her mother's tone that made Emma feel uneasy. On top of everything, Emma began catching subtle exchanges between Sarah and Jake that, individually, might have meant nothing but together formed a troubling picture. She'd noticed fleeting glances, as though they shared a private understanding. One night during dinner, she caught Jake smiling in a way that seemed oddly intimate, and Sarah's eyes held his for just a moment too long before she looked away, her cheeks flushed. Emma's heart sank, wondering if her instincts, which she'd tried to dismiss for so long, were now revealing something she wasn't ready to face. Emma's sleep became restless, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. She even started monitoring their behavior more closely, feeling uncomfortable and paranoid. What disturbed her most was the way Jake's demeanor softened whenever he spoke to her mother. He seemed more present, more engaged, and far more animated than he did with Emma herself. The fear that her mother and boyfriend might be involved in something deeper gnawed at her, but she couldn't bring herself to confront either of them directly. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake from, a twisted reality that left her questioning every memory, every conversation, and every moment they'd spent together as a family. One evening, everything changed for Emma in a way she could never have anticipated. It was a Friday night, and Emma had planned to spend it out with friends to distract herself from the gnawing doubts that had been consuming her for weeks. The atmosphere at her friend's house was lively, but Emma couldn't shake her unease, a strange feeling tugging at her to go home. She left the gathering early, hoping to find some peace in the quiet of her own house, expecting nothing more than a late-night cup of tea and a good night's sleep. But as she stepped through the front door, she immediately sensed something was off. The house was unusually quiet, yet there was an odd warmth in the air, the faint scent of Sarah's new perfume lingering. Emma noticed 2 empty wine glasses on the kitchen counter, a detail that struck her as strange since she hadn't planned to be home that night. She felt a chill as she realized that neither glass was hers. Moving further into the house, her curiosity soon turned to dread as she noticed a faint glow from the living room, signaling someone was still awake. She moved silently, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and disbelief at what she might discover. As she peered into the dimly lit living room, Emma froze, horrified by the scene unfolding before her. There, on the couch, were her mother and Jake, locked in an intimate embrace, their bodies intertwined in a way that confirmed the unthinkable. Emma couldn't breathe. It was as though the ground had disappeared beneath her. She had spent months trying to dismiss her suspicions, pushing aside every clue and telling herself it was her imagination. But now, faced with undeniable proof, she was struck by a profound sense of betrayal and devastation. It was a betrayal not only of her trust in Jake but in her mother, the one person she had believed would never hurt her. Her mind raced, a chaotic mix of anger, heartbreak, and confusion swirling inside her. She was rooted to the spot, feeling like an intruder in her own home, watching a nightmare unfold. Neither Sarah nor Jake noticed her, too engrossed in their private world to realize they had been caught. Unable to bear another second of the scene, Emma turned and fled the house, stumbling out into the night. She felt numb, her mind buzzing with the weight of what she had witnessed. She spent the night at her friend's house, her shock preventing her from speaking, let alone sleeping. It felt surreal, like her whole world had shattered in an instant. The next morning, Emma returned home, her emotions still raw. Confronting Jake and Sarah was one of the hardest things she had ever done, but she couldn't hold back her anger, pain, and heartbreak. They offered weak explanations, their words hollow and devoid of true remorse. Sarah tried to apologize, but her voice was filled with excuses, and Jake barely met Emma's gaze. The 2 people she had trusted most, the people she thought she knew best, had torn her life apart in a single moment. With her trust shattered and her heart broken, Emma made the painful decision to leave. She packed her things and left, not wanting to stay a minute longer in a house that now felt like a prison of betrayal. The silence of her departure hung heavy, with neither Jake nor Sarah able to stop her, each of them left to deal with the consequences of their actions. Emma walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of her family, determined never to look back. The reality of the affair was undeniable, and the damage irreparable. In the aftermath of the shocking discovery, Emma's life was completely upended. She found herself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, anger, heartbreak, and even a sense of loss that was almost impossible to process. In a single night, she had lost not only her boyfriend but her mother, the person she had trusted most in the world. Seeking refuge, she moved in with a close friend who offered her a safe space to begin piecing her life back together. Every day felt like a struggle, a painful reminder of how quickly her once stable world had been shattered. She tried to bury herself in work and her studies, but it was difficult to shake the constant ache in her chest, the questions that lingered unanswered. Meanwhile, Sarah and Jake were left to face the consequences of their actions, both within their small town and in their own lives. Word of the affair spread quickly, as news always did in Willow Creek. Friends and neighbors, once warm and welcoming, now turned a cold shoulder to Sarah. She found herself isolated, ostracized from the community she had once been a part of. Every trip to the grocery store, every walk down the street, was now accompanied by whispers and judgmental stares. She felt the full weight of her choices pressing down on her, the reality of the life she had ruined sinking in deeply. The regret gnawed at her, but there was no escaping the consequences of what she'd done. Jake didn't fare any better. His charm and easygoing nature had once made him a popular figure around town, but now he was viewed with disdain and suspicion. His work suffered, as clients and coworkers distanced themselves, unwilling to trust him after the scandal. Everywhere he went, he was reminded of the pain he had caused. For both Sarah and Jake, the fallout of their actions was harsh and unrelenting. They had broken not only Emma's trust but the trust of everyone around them, leaving their lives in disarray. Emma, however, was determined to find a way forward, despite the scars left behind. She focused on rebuilding herself, leaning on the support of close friends who rallied around her. She began therapy, determined to process her pain in a healthy way and regain a sense of control over her life. Each day was a small step toward healing, a chance to reclaim her identity apart from the betrayal she had endured. She took up new hobbies, surrounded herself with positive influences, and slowly began to rediscover her strength and resilience. Emma knew that moving on wouldn't be easy, but she was committed to creating a future free from the shadows of her past. As time passed, Emma's relationship with Sarah remained strained, nearly non-existent. Sarah reached out repeatedly, offering apologies and asking for a chance to make things right, but Emma couldn't bring herself to forgive just yet. She needed time and space to heal, and the pain was still too fresh to allow for any reconciliation. Sarah was left to grapple with the consequences of her choices alone, facing a quiet, lonely existence that stood in stark contrast to the lively home she'd once shared with Emma. The bond between mother and daughter had been deeply, perhaps irrevocably, damaged. Emma ultimately found a renewed sense of purpose in helping others who had experienced betrayal and heartbreak, sharing her story and listening to theirs. She channeled her pain into something meaningful, hoping that by connecting with others, she could find peace and closure. The experience left her wiser, stronger, and more resilient, determined never to lose herself in the trust of others as she had before. Her story became one of survival and recovery, a testament to the strength that can be found even in the face of unimaginable betrayal. In the end, the affair's consequences were far-reaching, touching not just Emma, Sarah, and Jake, but also the entire community. It was a harsh reminder of the damage that betrayal can inflict and a warning about the fragility of trust. Emma walked away from the experience scarred but resolved, her painful journey marking a turning point toward a future that, despite the heartache, she could still shape on her own terms.